Hey Hardy, Miss Grillo here. Thank you so much for joining me today on this Friday. As you can see, I am following the Hamilton County Schools, and I am representing our school spirit today by wearing my Hardy Elementary shirt. I hope you guys are doing the same. Miss y'all so much, but I'm glad you tuned in. We have a very fun activity I'm going to be doing with you today. Well, I'm going to be walking you through a little bit. It is Miss Grillo's famous chocolate chip cookie recipe. So, if you know me, I love to bake. And chocolate chip cookies are one of my favorites. And this particular recipe has been a hit for all of my friends. So, I'm going to walk you through it today. We are going to learn about how reading and fractions are important when baking, because I'm going to be honest with you, this recipe does not make that much. So today, Miss Grillo is going to need your help to double this recipe. And when I say double, that means I need to put an extra bit of all these ingredients into my cookies. So, when we double something, we are multiplying it by 2 or adding that number together. Okay, so as you can see, some of the ingredients we'll be working with today are sugar, light brown sugar, butter, vanilla extract, eggs, flour, baking soda, salt, and chocolate chips. And now what I am going to have to do is I'm going to have to do some math with you in order to figure out how much of each ingredient I'm going to need if I'm going to double the recipe. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I have already grabbed out all the ingredients. They are over here, and I will be working with you in order to get it all sorted out. So the most important thing when following a recipe is reading the ingredients, which we did, and I got them all out, and then following the directions. So here is the recipe. Take a second, read that first step under directions right there. All right, so the first thing I need to do is preheat the oven to 375 degrees. Now, please do not do this unless a parent is present to help you when cooking. So I'm going to go over to my oven, which is right over here, and I am going to set it for 375 degrees. All right, so whenever you are baking, getting the oven preheated is the most important step. So next, make sure you go wash your hands before you handle any ingredients that you're going to cook with. You just don't want to spread germs. I did that right before I started this video, so I am going to go ahead and move on. One thing I know, whenever you bake cookies, you need a cookie tray. Doesn't have to be this big, but it can be. And you need to grease it so the cookies do not stick. So you can either use something like Pam or, an oil-based spread, or you could even take some butter and just spread it up here. It's really just to help keep the cookies from sticking to the pan when they cook. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead, get some spray, make sure I get all of the pan, and then I can set it aside until I am ready to put my cookies on there. All right, so we've preheated the oven, we've greased our pan, so now it's time to get to the fun part, mixing the ingredients. So, take a second, here are the directions. Look at direction number 2. Read it to yourself. All right, it says mix sugars, butter, vanilla, and eggs in a large bowl. All right, so I have my large bowl right here. And now it is time for me to mix the sugars, butter, vanilla, and egg in this bowl here. Okay, so we have 3/4 cups of sugar, and we are going to have to double that, or multiply it by 2, or add 3/4 plus 3/4. So if you guys get out a piece of paper and a pencil and work this with me, I am going to walk you through this very first step of how we can take 3/4 sugar and double it. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is write sugar, just so we know that we're looking at sugar. Next, we know it is 3/4 of a cup of sugar. So whenever we are doubling a recipe, we are just multiplying by 2 or adding, doing repeated addition. So adding 3/4 plus another 3/4. Now I am going to do the repeated addition. I think it's a little bit easier, especially when you are working with fractions that have the same denominator. All right, so we have 3/4. We are going to add 3/4, and we need to figure out how much total sugar we are going to need. So first off, we have to look at our denominators. Are they the same? Well, we have a 4 here, and we have a 4 here. So yes, they are the same. So all I have to do when I'm adding, we do not change the denominator. So I am just going to carry that denominator over. So we're at 4. All right, next we can add our numerators. So 3 plus 3 is 6. All right, so 6/4 cups of sugar is how much we are going to need. But, what do we know about this number? Very good. It is an improper fraction. And unfortunately, my measuring cups do not measure improper fractions. So what we are going to end up doing is changing this improper fraction into a mixed number. So whenever you are changing an improper fraction into a mixed number, the first question you need to ask yourself is how many times does 4 go into 6? So the way to do this is to count by 4. So 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. Ooh, is 8 greater than or less than 6? You're right, it's greater than. So 4 can only go into 6 one full time. So that means we are just going to have one whole. Now we need to figure out 4 times 1 gives us 4. So how many more will we need to get to 6? Well, we'll start with 4, 5, 6. Oh, so how many more? 2. Very nice. So this 2 is going to be our numerator, and we can just carry over our denominator. So we will need 1 2/4 cups of sugar. But here's something interesting. When I was looking at my measuring cups, I don't have a 2/4. Is there any equivalent fraction that we can find? So a fraction that's equal to 2/4? Well, I want to try by dividing 2/4. I want to divide by 2. Whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So 2 can go into 4 how many times? 2. Very good. 2 times 2 is 4. So that means our denominator will be 2. And how many times does 2 go into 2? 1 time. Very nice. So we have 1/2 or 1/2. So that means 1 2/4 is the same thing as 1 1/2. So I'm going to need 1 1/2 cups of sugar. Here we have it. All right, now that we are done with the sugar, the next thing on our list was the light brown sugar. And just like the regular sugar, we have 3/4 cup. We're doubling the recipe, so for the brown sugar, how much am I going to need? If we start with 3/4 and we are doubling it, very good, 1 1/2 cups. So I have my brown sugar here. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to make sure I get 1 1/2 cups. Here we have it, and I'm going to put it right into my bowl. All right, the next thing is our butter. According to the second bullet, the next thing is our butter. So let's look at our butter. 1 cup or 2 sticks of butter. So this is a whole number this time. This is math we can do in our head. So we have 1 cup of butter. We are doubling that, which means we're doing 1 times, I heard it, 2. So 1 times 2, anything times 1 is that number. So we know we need 2 cups of butter. Ooh, but this is interesting. How many sticks makes 1 cup of butter? 2, right? So we have 2 sticks of butter, and we are multiplying that by 2. So how many sticks of butter are we going to need? 4. Very nice. So I have my 4 sticks of butter here. I have all 4 of my butters in there. Sugars are in there. Let's see what is next on our list. According to step 2, mix sugars, butter, and vanilla. All right, let's look at our vanilla. 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Well, great. We have another whole number. So when we multiply 1 by 2, very nice, because we are doubling the recipe. And then 1 times anything is that other number. So we're multiplying by 2, which means we need 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. So if you haven't seen them, these are teaspoons and tablespoons. Here is my vanilla extract, and I am just going to go ahead and pour it on into my bowl. And how many do I need again? How many teaspoons? 2. I heard it. Very nice. Yes, it is so important in baking that you are following the recipe exactly. Okay, so if you forget an ingredient or don't put enough of an ingredient, it can mess up what you're doing. So that's why it's super important that we understand how much we should be putting in of a certain item into things like cookies, because you don't want to mess those up. Because I'll tell you, Miss Grillo is very excited to eat some of these cookies later. Oop, and 2 teaspoons. Very good. Now, make sure you don't get them confused. This big one, that's a tablespoon. But it also says it on the measuring cup, so you should be okay. All right. So we go back to our recipe. We mix sugar, butter, vanilla, and the last thing is eggs. Very nice. This calls for 1 egg, meaning we need 2. But let it mix for a couple of minutes. Get all of the ingredients combined together. And while that is going on, we can actually move on and look at the next part. In our directions, the next part states, so number 3, stir in flour, baking soda, and salt. So it is super important, if we're going to end up doing this, to know how much of each thing we need. So the first thing we're going to look at is our flour. Wow, so right here it says 2 1/4 cup of flour. Ooh, so this may be a little trickier. So get your paper out, get your pencil out, and we are going to walk through 2 1/4 cup of flour together. All right, so just like I did with the sugar over here, I am going to go ahead and write flour because that is what we are on now. Flour. And as it says, we have 2 1/4 cup of flour. So I'm going to write down 2 1/4 cup of flour. Wow. So think for a second. What do we notice about this number? Very nice. It is a mixed number. And we've talked a little bit in class about how we add mixed numbers, okay? And so we are doubling the recipe, which means we're going to be adding 2 1/4 plus 2 1/4, repeated addition, remember, together. Now, what do we notice about what I did with these two numbers? I line them up. So my fractions are lined up and my whole numbers are lined up, okay? So whenever you are adding mixed numbers, this is a much easier way to go about it. So I have 2 1/4 plus 2 1/4. When adding fractions, when adding mixed numbers, we add the fractions together first. So 1/4 plus 1/4. So whenever we add fractions, we have to look at the denominator, make sure they are the same. Are they? Yep. So I can add 1/4 plus 1/4. The denominator is always going to stay the same. It'll stay as a 4. And then I'm going to do 1 plus 1. That gives us 2. All right, so we have 2/4. And then we look over at our whole numbers. 2 plus 2 is 4. So we're going to need 4 whole cups of flour and 2/4 of another cup. But wait, when we were looking at the sugars and we got 1 2/4, didn't we talk about the fact that 2/4 isn't a size of a measuring cup? So we realize that 2/4 is the same thing as 1/2. So instead of 4 2/4 cups, we are actually going to be 4 1/2 cups. But 4 2/4 cups is exactly the same thing as 4 1/2. Okay. So we've gotten the flour. The directions say stir in flour, baking soda, and salt. So we have 1 teaspoon of baking soda. So 1 teaspoon plus another teaspoon gives us 2 teaspoons. So I'm going to go ahead. And then we have our last ingredient that needs to be mixed, and that is salt. So let's look at our ingredients. We have 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So another thing we are going to have to add together. So what I'm going to end up doing is writing salt, just like I did with the flour and sugar. And we have 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Well, we're doubling the recipe or multiplying by 2, which means we're going to do 1/2 plus 1/2. So we have to ask ourselves, do we have the same denominator? Yep, they're the same, which means we can add them together. So our denominators always say the same. Whoops. Our denominators always say the same. And now we get to add our numerators. 1 plus 1 gives us 2. So 2 over 2, what do we know that to be the same as, guys? 1 whole. So with salt, I'm going to need 1 full. I just used the teaspoon. But this time we are only going to use one. And here's my salt. It's in a cute owl container. I'm going to do it right over my baking, just so the salt doesn't get everywhere. Keep an eye if it comes out. Just add a little less salt. All right, I am throwing it in my mix. And that is it for the mixture portion. I'm going to let it mix a little more just to make sure all that salt, all that flour, butter, sugar gets mixed together. And then we are going to move on to the chocolate chip portion. All right, so it is always good to go back and check your recipe just to make sure you've done all the steps so far and that you are ready to move on and get these babies in the oven. So let us look. Preheat the oven to 375 degrees. That is done. We mix the sugars, butters, vanilla, and eggs in a large bowl. Check, we did that. We stirred in the flour, baking soda, and salt. Good, we did that. All right, it is time to move on to our next one. The fourth bullet down. Hand stir in chocolate chips with a wooden spoon. All right, so let's look. How many chocolate chips do we need? 1/2 of a bag of chocolate chips. All right, well, we did the same thing with the salt, right? We had a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. We had to add another half. And what did that give us? 2 halves or 1 whole teaspoon of salt. So, is it any different with the chocolate chips? No. So, we have 1/2 of a bag. So now 1/2 plus 1/2 gives us 2 halves or 1 whole. But instead of teaspoons, we're looking at bag of chocolate chips. So, got my bag of chocolate chips here. I am going to go ahead and cut it open. And I am going to pour in my chocolate chips. All right, so this is what we have so far. And now it is time for me to stir up the chocolate chips and get them all mixed in so that every bite of cookie has a chocolate chip in it. All right, once you have stirred up all the chocolate chips into your batter, it should look something like this. So you can get a chocolatey bite in every cookie. So next we have to move back to our recipe and make sure that we are on the right track. So we just rechecked. So let's look at step 5 or bullet point 5. Round about 2 tablespoons of cookie dough or of dough in your hands and place on a greased cookie sheet. Now remember, we greased the cookie sheet earlier, so we do not have to do that. But now it is time for me to get 2 tablespoons, which is about the same thing as a regular spoon you would eat out of. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, but it brings up an interesting point. 2 tablespoons. Do we need to double this? Do we need to make it into 4 tablespoons? Take a minute of private think time. What do you think? Well, we have to change the number down here, around 2 tablespoons of dough, and change that to 4 tablespoons of dough. All right, have you got it? Well, I know I do. So, since this is talking about the size of the cookies, the 2 tablespoons is the size of the cookies. So, that is not something we need to double, okay? Because all the cookies, whether you're doubling the recipe or not, they should be about this size to cook. So, you do not need to double that. All right, after you have rolled them into balls and have taken 2 teaspoons and put them on the tray, they should look like this. Here they are, the finished product, fresh out of the oven. Ooh, they smell delicious. Now, once the cookies have come out of the oven, you give them just a few minutes to cool off, and they're ready to eat with a nice glass of milk or anything your heart desires. So thank you all for tuning in to this video. I hope you learned how to make these wonderful cookies, and I hope now we have a little bit better understanding of how important fractions are in our everyday lives, as well as how important reading and following directions are. I hope you try this recipe at home or try a different recipe just to work on those skills, and I'm so glad you joined in. Have a great weekend, everyone, and I will see you and talk to you next week. Bye, guys.